Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast. We cover everything Major League, from spring training to the World Series. We've got your favorite club covered, from New York to Boston to LA. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast.
Welcome into another edition of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. It's Thursday, February 25th. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. We are finally hitting springtime here in the Northeast. Here today, Wednesday night, as of time of recording, we finally hit 50 degrees. Oh, man, it sounds just funny to even say that for some of you guys out there listening down in Florida or Texas or wherever you may be, but I am just sick and tired of staring out my window, looking at this white fluffy stuff out on the ground, especially after having to shovel almost twice a week for the past 3 or 4 weeks. The month of February has just been relentless in the Northeast when it comes to snowfall, and being a former college baseball player with the college season opening this past weekend, which we're going to talk about here in an upcoming segment, it just makes me yearn for springtime, summertime, green grass, country music, whatever it is out there that you think of when you think of baseball. It's just, man, it's about that time. So it seems like we're turning the page here ever so slightly, getting out of those highs in the 30s, a lot of 40s coming this way. So we are just slowly churning towards Major League Baseball time. And then this weekend, the spring training games are going to start. So we'll have a lot to discuss with you guys coming up next week in regards to live action, some opening starts, kind of what we're looking at here, some of the position battles taking place across Major League Baseball. But before we get into all that, hopefully you guys checked out Patrick's first episode with us here at the GSMC Baseball Podcast. He's had 2, I believe, released by the time you're listening to this. So please rate and review the podcast. Welcome Patrick to the show. Check us out on social media. But shout out to him. And then, of course, Jack, who's been churning along with me here a couple times a week, bringing you guys great episodes moving forward on a weekly basis. But we got a fantastic show lined up for you here today. Unfortunately, we're going to start out on a bit of a negative note and negative connotation. We'll transition into some college baseball conversation. And then on the back end in segments 3 and 4, we'll get into some over-under predictions where I think you guys can win some money this year with some good value bets that are available out there to be had moving forward. But like I mentioned, a bit of a somber opening here because if you missed it, I know a lot of things on SportsCenter have been revolved around the Tiger Woods car crash and subsequent surgery, and shout out prayers to Tiger Woods. Hopefully he's okay. Looks like his ankle, shin, fibula, tibula needed to be done with surgery, and everything went well. He's recovering, but that has obviously dictated the time on SportsCenter. So you may have missed that the Seattle Mariners president and CEO resigned, and I think he was forced out. He was pretty much fired, but they gave him the dignity of saying, hey, can you resign, please, over those comments you made? We really don't want to fire you, which I've never understood. But ultimately, President and CEO Kevin Mather resigned based on the pushback and feedback from an interview that he did with a Rotary Club in early February, where we're going to break it down one by one, but this guy absolutely ripped to shreds multiple players, multiple prospects, said a lot of degrading comments towards all of them. Just kind of like a fascinating interview where does he not understand that in the year 2021, everything is being recorded, everything is being taped? I mean, I know he's an older gentleman in his 70s, and you think back to, back in 1970 when I was in high school, we could get away with this, that, and the third. I mean, think about Dazed and Confused, right? And all the antics that those kids were doing, and how nowadays, like I said, with home security, telephones, whatever it is, everything's caught on tape. And I mean, he's staring into a computer, giving an interview over the internet, and he doesn't think that what he says is going to be released, or he's not aware that what he's saying could be used against him moving forward. And then subsequently, how does something like this happen at the beginning of February, and it still takes 3 weeks for the public to find out, or for the public to gain access? Like, who was sitting on this video for 3 weeks, I guess trying to get more money for it? Like, were they trying to auction TMZ against ESPN to try to make a quick buck for themselves? Like, how does this not become public 24 hours after it happens? There's a couple of different instances within this entire thing that I just certainly don't understand. And I mean, if this interview was given February 2nd, how do we not hear about it on the 3rd or the 4th? Like, why does it take 3 weeks to be told that this guy basically talked crap on his entire organization moving forward? So it's just kind of a fascinating circumstance where, again, I just don't understand the timeline. But either way, Mather pretty much ripped multiple people within his organization. And, we'll get into kind of one by one who he talked about. But, the day later, he apologizes after it becomes public. He's committed to making amends and doing whatever it takes to repair the damage that he has caused the Seattle Mariners organization. And I mean, those are just all the cliches you hear with apologies. That's all just fluff. He doesn't actually care at all. And just, I'm sorry for what I did, and I swear I will be a better person moving forward. I mean, just write them down, what you're supposed to say during one of these press conferences, and that's exactly what you got from Kevin Mather when it comes to his apology. But the MLB Players Union, I'll just read you guys their statement that they put out in regards to feedback on this. It says, quote, "The club's video presentation is a highly disturbing yet critically important window into how players are genuinely viewed by management. Not just because of what was said, but also because it represents an unfiltered look into club thinking. It is offensive, and it is not surprising that fans and others around the game are offended as well. Players remain committed to confronting these issues at the bargaining table and elsewhere." So this is basically saying that, hey, yeah, the Seattle Mariners guy may have said this, but he gave a window into how baseball clubs think and how they operate. So when we're going to go to the bargaining table and we may have another strike when the CBA, the collective bargaining agreement, runs out here December 1st, you guys shouldn't be mad at us, because this is exactly what we're talking about when we're saying we're fighting for the players. But there was also a statement released by Major League Baseball. That one said, quote, "We condemn Kevin Mather's offensive and disrespectful comments about several players. We are proud of the international players who have made baseball better through their outstanding examples of courage and determination, and our global game is far better because of their contributions. His misguided remarks do not represent the values of our game and have no place in our sport." End quote. So, again, what did he say? If you guys haven't, read the articles or discussed it here yet. So, there were a couple of different circumstances that Kevin Mather put out there. Let's see. Let's start with the comments made about Julio Rodriguez, the 20-year-old, one of the best prospects in baseball, slugging right fielder from the Dominican Republic. When he was asked about him, Mather said he is loud and his English is not tremendous. So basically ripped the ability for one of his players to speak English, who is not from America, hasn't been here long, only been here a couple of years. I mean, I've always thought about it. Growing up, Division I baseball player, hey, if I had the opportunity to play in Korea or Japan, would I actually want to do that? Would I want to play somewhere where I can't speak the language, I can't read the language, I don't know how to order dinner, I don't know how to order cable, internet, lunch, whatever it may be? I mean, you are completely out of your element. So the GM, president, CEO rips him because he's got a big personality and doesn't know how to speak English, or it's not tremendous. So this wasn't, the only time he had this conversation. He then spoke about, from Japan, Hisashi Iwakuma. I'm going to butcher his name there, but, he talked about how they brought back Iwakuma, and he made about $50 million during his time while playing with the Mariners. And, he's a wonderful human, but his English is terrible. And Mather was tired of paying $75,000 for an interpreter for, Iwakuma, and just, smiled and laughed when he said it. So he ripped another guy for not being able to speak English when he came over, and how he was tired of not only paying him for his performance on the field, but also paying for an interpreter on top of that. And, then we got into, the starting pitcher, Marco Gonzalez, his ace starting pitcher, 29-year-old. He called him very boring because he doesn't throw very hard. And he made up a story about Gonzalez pushing former teammate Mike Leake into a locker. And, the problem here is sources familiar with what happened say, yeah, there was a confrontation between Gonzalez and Leake, but he never put his hands on him. So he called his ace pitcher boring, and then made up a story about how he was a negative locker room influence. And, Marco Gonzalez took this the right way. He changed his Twitter bio to, quote, very boring. So, playing the game here a little bit. He talked about Mitch Haniger, who, based on injury and missing some time, he's got a little bit of a chip on his shoulder. He's mentioned more than once, what about me, with all these prospects coming up, and he feels disrespected. And then he got into these prospects, speaking of not only how they can't speak English, but how he just openly communicated that they are manipulating the service time. And this is one of the worst kept secrets in Major League Baseball, that every single team manipulates the service time of any huge prospect coming up. And what I say by manipulating service time, as of the current collective bargaining agreement, there's a date, we'll call it the middle of May, to where if a prospect is called up after this date, their service time, or the amount of days that they have in major leagues, clicks to a certain level where the team has an extra year of control of arbitration. So if they come up for opening day, it starts the clock, and that's where the 5 years of control starts. But if they're not brought up till after May 10th, we'll just call it here, that clock doesn't start, and they get the rest of this year plus an additional year on the back end. And I go back and forth. First of all, I think it's horrible that it's in the CBA, but because it is in the collective bargaining agreement, I go back and forth on how I feel with teams manipulating this date. Because as a fan, I understand that, hey, yeah, this guy's going to be really good, so let's keep him on the team for an extra year at a much cheaper price in order for us to be competitive and pay other people moving forward. But then as a player, and as a former player, I certainly understand that this means the team isn't trying to win right now today, opening month of the 2021 season. I mean, they're clearly not putting their best guys out on the field. They're not putting their best product out there for the best entertainment for the fans' perspective. So as a player, it frustrates you to no end because you deserve to be out there. You deserve this opportunity, but because of how the rules are written, you're not going to get that until the middle or end of May. But then if I'm on the other side, the owner's side, the manager's side, general manager, and this is how the rules are written, you're certainly going to take that extra year of control at a cheap price, not the first 5 weeks of the season. I mean, one extra month of the performance isn't worth an extra year for when he is 5 years old. They're much more developed and probably a better baseball player. So the problem is that it's in the CBA, which, again, I expect to come out of the next agreement once the guys figure it out here in the next couple of years. But Jared Kelenic, he basically said, hey, we offered him a 6-year contract with 3 club extensions. He turned it down, and because of this, he's going to start in the minor leagues for 2021, and he'll be called up in the middle of April, early May, so we can get an extra year of control moving forward here. So basically just called out, yeah, we are manipulating the service time. Everybody knows it. I mean, one of the most transparent cases was that of Chris Bryant a few years ago, where he ended up suing, he ended up losing because the club can basically just say, no, we think you need a few more at-bats at the AAA level, and they're covered. They're no longer liable. So just a fascinating kind of issue that certainly, I hope, removes itself from the game here moving forward. Then he also ripped Kyle Seager, who's been the team's best player for the last 10 years. He signed a 7-year, $100 million contract, and Mather called him overpaid, even though Fangraphs says he's produced at a $147.7 million value, and his WAR is higher than Anthony Rizzo, Nelson Cruz, Justin Turner, Michael Brantley, all of these guys who are known names in Major League Baseball. So it's unbelievable, the conversation that he had. And for this guy to come out and have this type of conversation when back in 2018, 2 female employees accused him of inappropriate workplace conduct back in 2009 and 2010, and he came out. Guess what he said in his apology? Oh, we have to be better. I'm going to do my best to make sure everybody feels comfortable. Same exact apology he gave this past weekend, and it just shows, the culture out in Seattle has been absolutely horrible, and you wonder why they haven't made the playoffs in a certain number of years. I mean, this guy has been involved with this team, and just, oh, God, another just huge black eye for Major League Baseball in an offseason just full of these. And it's frustrating for a guy who loves the sport, loves to talk about it, but every time they're in the national news or every time a story's brought up here in the offseason, it's just a negative connotation on the game. So just, hey, the culture's terrible. Nothing's good. I mean, they're degrading women. They're degrading international people. They're degrading minor leaguers. So can we just come together and try to improve what's going on? I mean, owners, GMs, guys at the highest levels of management, you guys got to figure it out here moving forward. Please, for the love of the sport, just get it together. I mean, I can't put it any other way. Just be better. Just be better people. Be better humans, because I'm sick and tired of talking about this crap that's going on at the highest levels of management. It's so frustrating here. But all right, that's enough of the rants. That's enough of the segment here. We'll step aside for a word from one of our sponsors and one of our sister shows. And when we come back, we'll get into a little bit better conversation, a little bit more jovial, where we'll talk about college baseball, what happened opening weekend. There's a new number 1, a couple of new top 10s. So stick around, everyone. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. We'll be right back.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. It is Thursday, February 25th. Hopefully you guys are having a fantastic week out there. We are almost through the month of February. I mean, by the time I talk to you guys again next Monday, it's going to be March 1st. And what does that mean? That means March Madness, baby. I mean, come on, hoops, NCAA hoops. It's going to be flowing. We're going to have some fans back in March Madness. I mean, if you guys haven't checked out the other podcasts within the network, do yourself a favor. Check out the NCAA basketball podcast with March Madness going on, as well as it'll mean spring training games moving forward for Major League Baseball, so we'll have some game action to talk to you guys about. But outside of the basketball podcast, I mean, you got the NBA going to the All-Star break. We got the NHL in full force. The NFL should be coming back around with, free agency in March coming up here in a couple of weeks. A couple of guys getting cut, so there's a lot going on. And if you're not just into sports, I mean, there's cars, politics, health and fitness, news, books, movies. So whatever your hobby, whatever you're into, check out that podcast in the GSMC Podcast Network. So just type GSMC into that little magnifying glass search icon there, and it'll pull up a ton of different shows for you guys here moving forward. But speaking of NCAA basketball March Madness, this past weekend was opening weekend for college baseball, and I wanted to take segment number 2 here to discuss with you guys the opening weekend, talk about some of the surprises out there that, took place over the first weekend, as well as changes in the rankings, and giving you guys an update on what's going on. Because if you're like me and you're a true diehard baseball fan, you like to get into the top talent when it comes to college baseball, who may be drafted in the first round, which kind of arms, which programs are putting out the best talent. I mean, a lot of people in football love the NFL draft or the NBA draft, and this is due to the instant gratification of those players going right into the league and playing right away. And, of course, baseball, they go to the minors for 4 or 5 years, 2-3 years if they're on the fast track, and, fans don't kind of pay attention as much. But drafting is a huge part of success at the major league level. I mean, just locally here, the Philadelphia Phillies, they haven't really figured out this rebuild like the White Sox or the Padres. They kind of all went into a rebuild during the same time, but the Phillies have just absolutely drafted horribly up until the last year or two, where they brought in Brian Barber, they brought in the drive line guys, Ochart, to kind of work with the minor league level, so they've started to draft better. Case in point, Alec Baum, number 3 overall. He's going to be playing third base for 162 this year. Was runner-up Rookie of the Year last year. There's Bryson Stott at the shortstop position, probably going to take over for Didi in a couple of years. Casey Martin out of Arkansas, an up-the-middle type of guy, could take over for Gene Segura. So drafting is huge when it comes to developing your team, because if you draft well, you can then supplement that cheaper talent with the big free agency, like JT Realmuto, like a Bryce Harper. But if you don't have that drafting to go along with those guys, what do you get? You get a payroll of $210 million and a record of 28-32 when it comes to Philadelphia. And last year, we haven't been over 500 in 8 years, and yet the team has committed, I think, like $800 million in free agency over the last 4 years. I mean, throw in Zach Wheeler at $100+ million, Bryce Harper $300+, JT $100+. I mean, the numbers, McCutchen out in left field, just go on into the amount of money that they're throwing out because they can't draft. So, try to follow these college kids. You can understand who the top talent is, where it's coming from, and of course, SEC baseball tends to dominate. Big 12 as well at the top of the list, but we have some changes at the top already. I mean, Florida came in as the preseason number 1. They opened up with their rivalry series against Miami, and I had the pleasure of playing against Miami in college when they had the number 1 overall pick. Yonder Alonso, they had the number 8 overall pick. Jody Weeks, who was Jameel Weeks, second baseman. It was Weeks' brother, I think his name was, at second base. I may be messing that up, but they had 2 top 15 overall picks. We played down there with Lehigh University. I believe we lost 8-3. We saw their midweek arm who was throwing high 80s, didn't see their weekend aces, but Miami took 2 of 3 in this series, including a big come-from-behind victory. They were down 3 runs in the 8th and 9th inning in one game, come back to win. So it was the first time they had won this rivalry series since 2014. And, of course, the ACC-SEC crossover there. So Miami shot all the way up from number 21 up to number 6, just ahead of Florida, who fell from number 1 down to number 7. So the number 1 seed preseason goes to number 7. The number 2 preseason team, they drop all the way to 8. UCLA, they lost an opening series, lost 2 out of 3 to San Francisco. And this is one that was certainly a surprise because San Francisco, I think last year in the COVID-shortened season was like 9-8 or 8-9. They were right around 500. And yeah, they're a pretty decent ball club out there for San Francisco. But, UCLA at number 2 and their rotation, it was certainly assumed that they were going to at least win that series, if not sweep that series. So UCLA drops all the way down to number 8. And then we had the number 3 preseason team, Texas Tech, start out the year 0-3. Now, there was a college baseball showcase. College baseball showdown, the State Farm College Baseball Showdown took place in Arlington, where a lot of the top talent was playing against each other. But, of course, Texas Tech, they lost to number 3. Number 9, Texas, number 10, TCU, and one other team who's not in front of me here, but they started 0-3 in that tourney in Arlington, and it dropped them all the way down to number 10 on the list. So it just goes to show kind of the turmoil that's happening in college baseball. I mean, you have some leagues who aren't even playing in the spring. The Ivy League once again shut down spring baseball. There were a few other teams that folded due to the coronavirus and funding, such as Furman baseball down there in South Carolina. But, out west, the teams are only playing out west. They're staying within their zip code or time, whatever. And there's a lot of different regulations county to county. So the RPI for college baseball isn't really going to love that side of things. And it's just, man. So 1, 2, and 3 all go down, opening weekend and fall in the rankings. So, who was able to step up? Who was able to take advantage of, the new rankings at the top? And number one is Ole Miss. Mississippi goes from 6th up to 1. It was the first time Ole Miss was ranked number 1 in the history of these rankings for the last 7 years. They went 3-0 in defeating, there it is, they were another team to beat Texas Tech. So, Ole Miss goes all the way up to number 1. It's definitely a surprise there. Their offense isn't supposed to be as deep as it showed this opening weekend, so a lot of offensive guys overperforming, ranking them all the way up to number 1. You also had Arkansas, who had a fantastic showing during the showdown in Arlington as well. They defeated the same people as Ole Miss, so they vaulted 6 spots from number 8 to number 2. It is their highest ranking ever achieved in the top 25, so they're up at number 2. And then number 3 and 4, kind of more your stalwarts, and number 5 as well. But number 3 is Vanderbilt, coming out of the SEC. They were 2-0 this weekend. They had a game canceled due to weather, but certainly their rotation, super impressive. And when it comes to draft prospects, I mean, they have 2 of the guys right at the top. First off, Kumar Rocker. You guys know him based on his no-hitter, 18 strikeout game last year in the Super Regionals. He's rumored to be the number 1 overall pick. Not a lot of questions there at the top of the draft. He's a high 90s guy. He's added an impressive cutter to go along with his repertoire with that curveball. So Rocker started off the year with an 8 strikeout dominating performance, but not to be outdone with Jack Leiter. And if you guys know the name Leiter, yes, he is related to all those Leiters who have played in the big leagues. And, he was absolutely electric his first time out. The guy was 98, 99, 100 miles an hour on a few of his, dealings. It's just, man, I didn't think he'd be throwing it that hard. He's really kind of launched himself to the top level of that draft based on how hard he's worked. I read some scouting reports that said he may be a midweek starter for the Commodores, but it certainly doesn't look like that's where he's going to be after his first outing there, sitting down 9 guys, touching 100 miles an hour on the gun. So Vanderbilt's rotation, certainly one of the best in all of college baseball, and something to keep an eye on here if you're a fan of, watching pitching staffs. At number 4, we have Louisville. They were 3-0. They had a fantastic start. They jump up from number 5. And then number 5, Mississippi State, went 2-1 during the college showdown to launch them into the top 5. Continuing down the rankings, like I said, Miami at 6, Florida at 7, UCLA at 8. UC Santa Barbara went 2-1 opening weekend. They jumped from number 11 up to number 9. So the West Coast team out there, UC Santa Barbara jumps up. Texas Tech fell to 10. LSU and Virginia holding steady. These 2 fantastic programs. LSU went 2-1, goes from 12 to 11. Virginia 2-1 went from 16 to 12. And, I always tend to root for UVA because my first collegiate start came against a 13-ranked Virginia team that had 3 future big leaguers on it. David Adams, who played second base for the Yankees. They had Phil Gosselin, who still played for the Phillies. The Mets just signed with the Angels. They had a few other rotational pieces. Jake Thompson, he was the starting rotation. He didn't make it long. Michael Schwimmer, who recently started and, made it to the show. So they had about 5 big leaguers on that team, and I'm making my collegiate debut as an 18-year-old. Did pretty solid. I think it was 4 runs over 6 innings, so nothing to really sneeze at there, but I always tend to root for Virginia, and here we are, almost 14 years later, and there's still a top 15 program. 13, 14, 15, you got NC State, TCU, falls from number 10 to 14 after a 1-2 weekend. Georgia Tech, Wake Forest, South Carolina at 15, 16, 17. Then we got Texas falling from number 9 all the way down to 19 because of an 0-3 start at that show down there in Arlington. So the local boys didn't exactly perform well in regards to what's going on. We had the Tennessee Volunteers at 3-0 go up to number 18. So they had a pretty light opponent opening weekend, going 3-0 and only jumping up 1 in the rankings here. 20, 21, 22, Oklahoma State, Auburn, East Carolina jumps up from 25 to 22. So they have a bit of a leap there. And then 23, 24, 25, West Virginia, Florida State, and Duke rounded it out. So West Virginia drops from 14 to 23 after a 2-2 opening weekend. And the only team that dropped out of the rankings was Arizona, who was at 22. But after a 2-2 opening weekend, fell out of favor at the top of the draft there. So, or the top of the rankings. But, if you guys aren't big into college baseball, there's, I would say head to the conference websites because, a lot of times they're not going to be on ESPN or your local Fox stations, but you can find some opportunity to watch some ball when it comes to the conference websites. There's a couple of websites out there where you can really dive into some detail, but it's just fun. I mean, the guys in college play with huge intensity, huge emotion because you're not quite at that professional level, so you can get away with a little bit more emotion and, the pitching staff, the catchers, the hitters, kids just try to open up a little bit more, and it's a lot of fun. And, yes, they have that metal bat and that ping sound. I myself always love the wood, the crack of the bat, but you get that ping at the college level, so it's just, it's a good time to watch the kids play for the fun of the game. And, I played at the Patriot League level, so the lower level Division I style of baseball where we tend to, again, travel down south, where my favorite stories are who I played against, where we played, how we did. Like I said, I touched on my Virginia story just a little bit ago, playing against 4 or 5 big leaguers. That same year, we went down to Miami, playing a midweek game, playing against 2 of the top 10 picks and 3 future big leaguers. We also played against Notre Dame during my career. We were able to win that game 3-2. And Golden Tate was the center fielder for that team. Yeah, that Golden Tate that's in the NFL and playing with the Giants right now. So I played baseball against him in college, and, it's just fun to play against these teams. California, Florida Atlantic, Boston College, UNC Wilmington, UNC Wilmington, Davidson. So traveling around with the guys, being on the bus, having some fun. And if you're into it, the Major League Draft, you can watch a lot of these guys at the top level in the ACC, SEC, kind of get a feeling for the arms, the top couple of rounds, and follow along here as the season progresses. But, I just wanted to kind of bring that up for you guys there. Like we said, not any spring training games currently happening, so wanted to discuss college baseball. But we're going to step aside here. That's it for segment number 2 for a word from one of our sponsors and one of our sister shows. But when we come back, all the over-unders have been released for Major League Baseball teams, and I think there's some value out there to be had, both in the overs and the unders. So we're going to run through conference by conference, division by division. I'll give you guys my picks and my takes on where we could win some money here for the 2021 season. But that'll do it for segment number 2. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. We'll be back right after this.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Hello again, and thanks for listening to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. If you guys haven't checked us out on social media yet, do myself a favor, do yourself a favor. Hit us up on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, both the GSMC Baseball Podcast as well as the GSMC Podcast Network. We got pages on both of them for the network as well as the baseball pod. And with the season coming up here, starting in spring training in about a week, especially hit us up on Twitter. We'll keep you guys up to date with all the latest action going on out there, all the news on rosters, battles going on, 40-man rosters, a lot of minor league signings that could end up making the team. Ultimately, somebody's going to have to be removed from the 40-man. I mean, the Phillies have some decisions to make. They got like 3 or 4 guys not currently on the 40-man roster that ultimately I think are going to end up making it in the bullpen, and they're going to have to remove some people. So if you want to stay up to date with all of that type of action, check us out, GSMC Baseball Podcast. We'll keep you guys up to date. But here we are, segment number 3. And this week's episode earlier, I talked to you guys about MVP, best bets, where the odds are at, who ultimately I think brings the best value, who's the favorite, where we could win some cash. And I figured today would be a good time to go over the over-unders for the win totals for all teams in Major League Baseball. They were set by Vegas Insider. That's who I'm going to be using as my source. If you guys are out there in one of the, I think it's 8 or 10 now states that legalize sports gambling, Michigan and Virginia, most recently to the party here in Pennsylvania. We're able to do it, New Jersey, all around here. So there's some value out there in these divisions based on my predictions and projections on where I think you guys could make some cash here for the 2021 season. So we'll start out with the American League here in segment number 3, and then we'll wrap up segment number 4 talking about the National League. But wherever your win totals are, it could be off by 1 or 2. But like I said, I'm using Vegas Insider as my source for the odds totals. But we'll start out in the American League East. We'll kind of go number 5 up to number 1. I'll give you my take on everybody, where I think they finish, and then best bets across the American League on ultimately where I think the value is. So starting out with the American League East, we have the Baltimore Orioles coming in at 64.5 over-under victories for the year. And ultimately, I think this one's going to be the under. I don't think Baltimore is going to be able to win 65 games this year. I think they are a 100-loss team when it comes to the 2021 season, and that puts them at 62 wins at the top level, and I think they could lose more than 100 even. So at 64.5, I think the value there is for the under. I have them right around 60 victories for the upcoming season. Ultimately, I think you could get some value there for the under. I think that one's a little bit high, but I don't think it's potentially the best bet in the entire division. Next up at the number 4 spot, they have the Boston Red Sox at 80.5. So a 500 record at 81-81 would hit the over for the Red Sox. But as of right now, I think they're leaning towards the under. I think 500 maybe right around where they finish. But based on the division and ultimately the schedule, they're going to have to play against everybody else, Toronto, Tampa, and New York above them. I think Boston's looking at a sub-500 record this year, and they're still talking to Jackie Bradley Jr. about a potential reunion. We've brought that up on a couple of different rumor segments. He's looking for a 4-year deal, 10, 12, 15 million a year. I don't think he gets that in Boston. I do think he ultimately ends up back in Boston, but it could be kind of a 1-year pact, maybe a 2nd-year option if he hits some escalators or incentives. But 81-81, I think, is on the high level. And really, I think this is just due to the rotation. I know Chris Sale is coming back off an injury. He's looking to return here over the middle of the season, but I think it may be too little too late. And with all the turnover they've had, bringing Alex Cora back, I think is a positive. I think it will stabilize that locker room. They've made a handful of moves here recently, bringing in a relief pitcher from Japan. But ultimately, I think they finish under 500, and 80-82 is kind of the high level I have them at. So I think Baltimore and Boston both hit the under when it comes to their projected rankings here, or their over-under win total. Next on the list in 3rd place, they have the Tampa Bay Rays at 85.5. And this is where things start to get interesting, because I think Tampa's number is right where it should be. I don't see a lot of value in betting on this one, and Toronto is right above them in second place at 86.5. So they have Toronto as the second place team. And you guys know, based on my predictions, I do think that Toronto is ultimately going to be one of the wild card teams that makes the playoffs. Now, how many victories is it going to take to make the postseason? Potentially 90 victories in the American League. So over under 86.5. I have Toronto leaning over and Tampa Bay right around 85, but slightly leaning under. I don't think there's a lot of value in either of these opportunities. I think this is kind of right where they should be in regards to their win total. So I honestly, I would advise you to stay away from Tampa and Toronto when it comes to putting any sort of money on the over-unders there. I like the Boston under. I like the Baltimore under. Tampa and Toronto. I'm not a huge fan of playing either way. And then at the top of the list, they have the Yankees at 95.5. And I see some value in this one hitting in the over. I think New York's going to be right around 100 wins on the year. I think the Yankees will have a time beating up on Baltimore and Boston. I do think Tampa and Toronto will do the same. That's why I like the under for Boston and Baltimore. But New York at 95.5, people have them as the top-rated team in the American League. Ultimately, I have them as the second-place finisher in the AL. So I think there's another team there where there is more value in regards to betting here. But I do believe that the Yankees at 95.5 should finish slightly above that record. I have them right around 100 wins. If they get Luis Severino back during the year, a lot of this is predicated on health. Giancarlo Stanton, Aaron Judge. But if both of those guys stay healthy this year, I think they could hit the over. I think Sanchez has a bounce-back year behind the dish. Could lead to some more victories, some more offense. I don't think he'll struggle as much as he did last year. So I'm going with the Yankees over 95.5 victories this year. Transitioning now to the American League Central. We have the Detroit Tigers at 68.5. In Detroit, man, this really predicates on how their prospects really pan out this year. It's truly going to be a rebuilding year. They added some veteran bats, Robbie Grossman, a couple of other major leaguers to the unit there, but I think Detroit is one of the three worst teams in the American League, so I could see them finishing around 65 or so victories. I like the under when it comes to 68.5 in Detroit. I don't think they're going to develop that much to be able to surprise people to get to that 70 and 90 mark that it would take to hit the over in this situation. And the fourth place team, the Kansas City Royals at 72.5. This is probably right around where they finish. I don't see value when it comes to this type of gambling opportunity with Kansas City. I think 70 and 90 is right around where they'll be. If they get a couple of hits to go their way, a couple of breaks, some healthy players stay healthy, I think they could finish right around that 72 mark. So ultimately, I would stay away from Kansas City in this aspect. Number 3 is the Cleveland Indians at 81.5, and 82 and 80 hits the over for Cleveland. My gut's telling me the over in regards to Cleveland. Yes, I know they've moved on from some guys, Carlos Carrasco, Francisco Lindor, but Cleveland is a well-run organization. Terry Francona should be back managing for them in Cleveland. So again, my gut's telling me to take the over when it comes to the Indians and ultimately their win total. And then number 2 on the list, we have the Minnesota Twins at 88.5. This would put Minnesota as the number 1 wild card team, which was right where I predicted them to be. I think they could reach that 90 win mark. They could go 90 and 72. So I'm leaning slightly towards the over for the Twins. Josh Donaldson stays healthy at third base. They got the infield that they're spending a ton of money on. Miguel Sano. We talked about $40+ million in the infield. Buxton in the outfield. I like Minnesota hitting slightly on the over on the 88.5. And then ultimately at the top of the list here, this is where I see the most value being had in the American League. I was high on the Chicago White Sox last year. I had them as my surprise team. Ultimately, they faltered down the stretch in the last week. They really could have pulled away with that division last year. And I think with the additions they've made with Lance Lynn, Liam Hendricks, they're going to be even better in 2021. And this is my favorite bet in the American League. I said the Yankees are going to win over 95.5 games. Well, with my White Sox being the number one team that I have in the American League, I have them easily winning over 100 games. I think this team could get up to the 105 mark, and at 91.5, I certainly see them having an advantage here in this division. I mean, when it comes to the competition as well, like I said, Detroit, I'm leaning slightly under. Kansas City, I have right around 70 wins. Cleveland, right around 500. So I think the White Sox are going to beat up on those three teams pretty handily when it comes to this year. So 91.5 wins, I certainly value the over. I mean, Keuchel, Giolito, Lynn at the top, that bullpen of Hendricks, the offense, Abreu, Moncada, Roberts out there. I talked about him potentially being a long shot for the MVP to make a move on. So if I have one bet to make in the American League, I'm going over White Sox, 91.5 wins moving forward out there. This brings us to the American League West and the Texas Rangers. They have the second lowest over-under win total at 66.5 this year, and I see a lot of value in the under when it comes to the Texas Rangers. I think Detroit, slightly better than Texas, but I feel Texas could be the worst team in the American League, and 60 and 102, not out of the question. So I think Baltimore loses 100 games. I also think Texas wins or loses over 100 games. So certainly taking the under when it comes to the Rangers and 66.5 here. Fourth place, they have the Seattle Mariners at 72.5. And this is where I think I'm taking Seattle in the over. I know we talked at the top of the show. There's been some chaos within the organization. New president, new CEO. But everything I'm hearing out of the clubhouse is that they feel the culture is strong enough to still put together a solid team this year. They have 2 out of the top 10 prospects in all of baseball and 3 or 4 in the top 25, 30 or so that could ultimately make their debut this year. And I think Seattle at 72.5, even with Kansas City, I think Seattle's a much better team than the Royals. They recently added James Paxton to the rotation, so I'm going over with Seattle at 72.5. Third place, they have the LA Angels at 83.5, and this is one where I had the Angels in consideration for that wild card out in the American League West at 83.5, and I think ultimately to be involved, you're going to have to be at 85 to 90 wins due to Toronto, Tampa Bay, and Minnesota being in that conversation. So I like the over when it comes to the Angels. Now, they've burned me in a couple of past years here. They refuse to kind of figure it out and take that next step, but I think Mike Trout is going to be as good as ever when it comes to the 2021 season. He's the clear favorite for the American League MVP at plus 200. We talked about last episode, so I'm leaning slightly over when it comes to the Angels, but 83.5 is going to be right around where they are. The second place team over under is the Houston Astros at 86.5. And the Astros, for my money, were still the favorite for the American League West. Based on some recent additions by the Oakland A's, I think this may have changed the over-under numbers slightly, but I think Houston could get to 90 wins on the year. We saw last year how they kind of went through the motions when it came to the regular season, really flicked that switch when it came to the postseason, but they get Yordan Alvarez back at the designated hitter role if he's able to stay healthy. If the kids in the rotation continue to progress and continue to develop, I think it's going to be the over for Houston when it comes to 86.5. And then they have the Oakland A's as the number one team in the West at 87.5. And this one's difficult for me because, again, I like Houston to be around 90 wins. I had Oakland as a second or third place team, but some of these recent additions, most importantly to the bullpen, I think they've restocked that bullpen well. They got A.J. Puck coming off an injury to get back into the rotation. I don't know which way I'm going with Oakland at 87.5. I think that's a really good number for them. My gut's saying slightly over when it comes to that particular value, but I don't like that bet. I don't like those odds. I think they're going to be right around that number moving forward here in the American League. So when it comes to my best bets in each division, I like in the American League East the over on the Yankees, 95.5. I like them up around 100 wins. I like the under when it comes to the Baltimore Orioles at 64.5. And, I don't think they're going to be that good. I think they lose 100 games. In the American League Central, I'm taking the over on the White Sox, 91.5 victories. I think they're going to be up around 100. And then the under on the Detroit Tigers when it comes to 68.5. And then out west, my best bet in this division is over for the Seattle Mariners, 72.5. So those are the 5 bets that I would most likely put out there in regards to seeing the most return on investment when it comes to the value moving forward. But that'll do it here for segment number 3 of the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Let me know in the comments which best bet you guys like when it comes to over-unders. If you agree or disagree, let me know. Leave a comment. I'll read them here on the show. But we'll step aside here one last time for segment number, or word from one of our sponsors and one of our sister shows. But when we come back, we'll get into our 4th segment discussing the National League over-under. So stick around, everyone. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. We'll be right back.
Want to know the latest in soccer? Then listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast. From MLS, the World Cup, and the Premier League, we've got you covered. The latest updates, the hottest matches, and news on the league's top players. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast.
David Beckham scores the goal to take England all the way to the World Cup finals.
Listen now.
Welcome back to the 4th and final segment of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. Thanks for listening, everyone. We've had a wonderful show for you guys here today on Thursday, February 25th. I appreciate all you guys listening in. Like I mentioned last segment, we talked about the American League over-unders. Now we're going to transition over to the National League in regards to talking about the best bets out there, the best value I think could be had for Vegas Insider and where they set the over-unders in the National League East. And starting out in the East, you guys know based on my predictions, I think this is going to be the toughest division to ultimately decide where everybody finishes. I mean, depending on injuries, health, there could be a lot of sway in regards to first place to 4th place. It could be very tight. I think there could be a 5-game difference between every one of those. So, jumping right into it here, they have the Miami Marlins at 70.5 coming in at 5th place. And this is an interesting one because, again, based on history, based on my gut, it's telling me that this is where the Marlins are going to finish, right around 70 and 92. Could certainly be a nice season for them. But, looking back squarely at 2020, obviously the Marlins overperformed and made the postseason when nobody thought they were going to. But this came on the heels of a ton of injuries for the Nationals. Also, a historically bad bullpen in Philadelphia. You had the Mets, who were not very good once again. And then, of course, the Braves, who were pretty much, head and shoulders above everybody else in this division. So do the Marlins continue to progress? Do they continue to develop? Do all the kids in the rotation withstand 162 games? I mean, we saw Sixto Sanchez come up, light the world on fire for about a month, 5-6 weeks. And then ultimately at the end of the year, did fall off a little bit. And, he has yet to put together a campaign of close to 200 innings. So is he going to be able to stay healthy? If he is, and the answer is yes. I certainly think the over could hit for them. Offensively, they added some nice pieces, some veteran bats down there in Miami. But, I'm staying away from the Marlins. I'm not exactly sure where they're going to finish. I do think it is 5th place, but I'm not sure how low ultimately they're going to be in their win total. And right around 70 wins does sound about accurate for the Marlins here. In 4th place, they have the Philadelphia Phillies at 80.5 victories. And this is where, guess you can call me a homer. You could call me a local boy, but I think this is the year where the Phillies finally finish over 500. It's been, almost 10 years now since it's happened. 10 years since they made the playoffs. Probably 8 or 9 years since they finished above 500. 81-81 would hit the over for the Phillies. And this is where I'm putting my money on the additions they've made to the bullpen. They've added a ton of guys who throw hard. You know, they didn't have guys who could break a pane of glass last year, but new GM president Dave Dombrowski added a bunch of hard throwers, both from the left and right side. They also added some nice veteran bullpen arms on minor league deals that I believe are going to make the team. Hector Rondon, Brandon Kinsler, you know, among those two, Jose Alvarado from the left side. And this was a team that had a lead in 47 out of 60 games last year. They had a lead in more games than the Dodgers did for the 2020 season. And if it wasn't for the worst bullpen in the history of baseball, certainly would have made the playoffs and finished above 500. And they brought back the entire offense. That was top 5 in baseball. Brought back JT Realmuto. Brought back Didi Gregorius. They were the top 2 free agents out there on the market. They got the top end of the rotation, the top 3 of Nola, Eflin, Wheeler. I like the 4-5 they've added. They added a couple of arms that, you know, if they pan out in the rotation, should be solid. Spencer Howard still hanging around. Are they going to go 6-man rotation? So I do think the Phillies finish above 500, possibly flirting with a wild card bid. So I like the over here when it comes to the Phillies and finishing above 80.5 wins. Next on the list, they got Washington at 84.5. And if you guys listen to my conversation, my predictions, I think Washington's going to be right there for that second wild card bid. And according to the league here, over-unders, they'd just miss out. You know, they'd be that first team out of the postseason. But if Steven Strasburg comes back healthy, Patrick Corbin continues to deal, of course, Max Scherzer, a slight ankle injury here in spring training, but ultimately I think he's going to be fine. So I like the over when it comes to the Nationals here as well. I think they're going to be 85 to 90 victories. They're going to be in that conversation for the wild card. I think, you know, they won the World Series just 2 years ago. People forget how quickly people forget. So I'm taking the over when it comes to the Nationals as well. Next on the list, we got the New York Mets at 90.5. And for those of you out there who aren't in, you know, a National League East market, aren't in Philadelphia, you're probably going to look at that and think you should take the over. I mean, they added Taijuan Walker, James McCann, Francisco Lindor. They got Pete Alonso, Michael Conforto. But, you know, my gut is telling me to take slightly under 90.5. I mean, I'm personally not going to put any coin on this one just because I could see the Mets winning 90 to 95 games, being that postseason team. But truly, I think they're going to take the under. And it's one of those, until they show it to me on the field, I think the Mets are going to be the Mets, and they're going to finish slightly under 90.5. But first off in the division, the Atlanta Braves, 91.5. Only one game better than the New York Mets. And this is where I'm taking the over with the Braves. I mean, last year, I talked to you guys about how they had a 3-1 lead in the championship series over the Dodgers. And if their bullpen was able to hang on to a game or two, they could have been representing the National League in the World Series. And I don't think the Braves got that much worse. I mean, they added Charlie Morton to the rotation. They got Fried, Wright, a couple of other guys battling. Yes, they lost some bullpen's arms. You know, most recently Mark Melancon going out to the Padres, so that could be a problem. But the offense of Freeman, Acuna, Albies, all the guys they have there, D'Arnaud behind the dish, I still think Atlanta is clearly the team to beat in the National League East, and I think they are better than a game better than the New York Mets. So I'm taking the over on the Braves, pushing on the Nationals, over on Washington and Philadelphia. And if you really had to make me choose, I'll go slightly under on the Marlins, 70.5. But I think the best value in the National League to me right now is still on the Braves, hitting over that 91.5 win mark. Now to the National League Central. Fifth place, the Pittsburgh Pirates at 58.5. So this is the first team where Vegas thinks they are going to lose 100-plus games. I certainly agree with them. I think that Pittsburgh is arguably the worst team in baseball, right up there with Baltimore and potentially Colorado out west. So, yeah, 58.5, the lowest win total they have, but I'm still thinking I'm going to take the under on the Pirates, and I'm looking at 50 and 110 when it comes to potentially a record for the Buccos out there in Western Pennsylvania. So, sorry to all my Pittsburgh fans. Love your ballpark, PNC, absolutely beautiful. But I see this as a really down year for the Pirates. Fourth place, they got the Chicago Cubs at 79.5. They got the Cubs at right under 500. And my gut's telling me the under on this one as well. I thought the Cubs would drop off a little bit more last year than they did when it came to their record and their standings. And, the reason I say the under is because I think Chicago ultimately mid-season makes some moves here and move some talents. I mean, they ship Yu Darvish out of town. Yes, they got back Davies from San Diego. They still got Hendricks out there dealing, but truly, I just don't see the Cubs being super competitive this year. I think ultimately they do move Chris Bryant by the time the trade deadline comes around. I think they're going to extend Baez and let Rizzo's deal play out, potentially even move on from Anthony Rizzo. So I think they finished slightly under that 79.5 win mark, and they're more around that 75 total victory mark here moving forward. Next up, tied for second place, the Milwaukee Brewers and the Cincinnati Reds. Now, the Brewers at 82.5, my gut's telling me slightly over. If Christian Yelich is able to bounce back, they got Williams out of the bullpen throwing airbenders, essentially screwball changeups, one of the most unhittable pitches in all of baseball, and Ryan Braun will not be returning this year, so that's certainly a detriment, but they signed Wong to play second base, and I think they're going to be that second-place team here in the National League Central and finish slightly above that 500 mark, which is where they have them here currently at 82.5 victories. Now, when it comes to the Cincinnati Reds, I'm actually going slightly under. The Reds were my surprise team last year in the National League, along with the White Sox, but based on their offseason moves, not spending any money, losing Trevor Bauer, Sonny Gray potentially being on the trade market, they got Castillo potentially on the trade market. I think similarly to Chicago, this is a year where they start out a bit slow and then ultimately move on from some of their top talents. I know offensively, Moustakas, Castellanos, they got Suarez out there, but I just feel that the Reds are probably the third-place team in this division, which puts them right below Milwaukee and hitting the under when it comes to the value in their over-unders. The St. Louis Cardinals, 86.5 at first place in the division. I'm going slightly over. I think St. Louis, bringing back Adam Wainwright, bringing back Molina behind the dish, Paul Goldschmidt at first base, adding Nolan Arenado, I think is going to bring more victories than people are alluding to. I think Arenado is potentially one of the best third basemen to ever do it, and he's on that trajectory certainly. So I think the Cardinals are clearly the team to beat in the National League Central. I wouldn't be surprised if they end up around that 90-win mark, 90-70. So I'm going over on the St. Louis Cardinals when it comes to the 86.5 over-under mark here set by Vegas. And then wrap it up in the NL West. The Colorado Rockies at the bottom of the division at 64.5. I'm taking the under, in Colorado. I think Colorado is in for a long summer. I think they're going to be battling with the Pirates when it comes to the basemen in the National League. They moved Arenado, of course. I think Trevor Story gets moved at some point during the season. I don't think he wants to, re-sign long-term out there in Denver and Colorado, so I think they're going to move him for some prospects, which completely depletes that infield and basically leaves Charlie Blackmon as the only guy out there on an island by himself. So I think the under 64.5 is a pretty solid bet if you're looking at the Rockies and which way to place your money. Fourth on the list, the Arizona Diamondbacks, 74.5. And this one's right around where I have them. I don't think Arizona's very good. Last year, there were some people talking about how they could be the second, third best team in the division, and they really disappointed. Madison Bumgarner has that huge deal that I thought was a mistake at the time when he signed it, and I still feel like it's a mistake. I mean, of course, he was fantastic during his time with the Giants, but just a ton of bullets being used already. So I think the under for Arizona is probably the lean when it comes to that side of things. Third place, San Francisco Giants, 75.5. And San Francisco certainly surprised last year. They were right in the wild card race to the last weekend, right around 500. Gabe Kapler did a nice job, but I think they're under 75.5 as well. I think they're right around that 70 win mark as well with Arizona. They don't have enough pitching, even with Cueto, even with Gausman. It's not enough for me to ultimately feel comfortable about the Giants here and their prospects of winning at least 76 games in 2021. But these top two teams, everybody knows San Diego and LA, and according to Vegas, San Diego's second place at 94.5. I think that's low. I think the Padres are absolutely going to win 100 games this year. I know LA is the favorite in the division, and I still think so, but I see San Diego and LA both winning 100-plus games, and this is another reason why I'm leaning under on San Francisco and Arizona's totals, because I think the Padres and Dodgers are both going to beat up on those bottom three teams in the division. So I think this may be the best bet in the National League, taking the over on San Diego, 94.5. The top team, the Dodgers, where are they coming in at? They are at 102.5 over-under. I like the over on this one as well. I think LA's 105, 110 win team over the course of 162. Obviously the best team in the National League, and according to this, clearly the best team in baseball. They're at 102.5, and the next closest team's the Yankees at 95.5, so they have them 7 games better than the next team here. And I still like the over when it comes to the Dodgers and 102.5. That rotation, Buehler, Kershaw, adding Bauer, Betts, Bellinger out there. It's just, man, this team is loaded from top to bottom, and I think 105, 110 is not out of the question when it comes to total victories for the Dodgers. So, best bets here in the National League. I like the over on the Braves when it comes to the NL East, potentially the over on the Phillies at 80.5. When it comes to the NL Central, I'll take the under on the Pirates, even though it's the lowest number at 58.5. I'll also take the over on the Cardinals at 86.5. And then in the West, I'm going over when it comes to the Dodgers and the Padres. I think both of those teams are fantastic. Both are going to win 100, 105, 110 games. So I'm going over with the Dodgers and the Padres there. But that'll do it for our over-under conversation in today's episode. Thank you guys for tuning in once again. Hopefully you enjoyed today's episode. Just to recap here briefly, we talked about everything going down in Seattle with Kevin Mather stepping down, those comments he made about the organization, the changes they're trying to do with the culture out there. We then discussed college baseball. I also forgot to mention there was a kid from Florida Atlantic who hit 2 grand slams in one single inning. That's only been done like once or twice in big league history, so I wanted to bring that up before we wrapped up. And then, of course, the over-unders were my best bets. Over on the Padres and over on the White Sox are the two that I think you guys should take to the bank out there wherever you can. But that'll wrap things up. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. Check us out on social media, GSMC Baseball Podcast, as well as please rate, review, share, subscribe, like, whatever it is out there you guys know on social media. Certainly helps us continue to grow and continue to bring you guys quality content here on a daily basis. But that'll do it for this week. I'll talk to you guys again on Monday when we should have some game action, spring training opening up this weekend. So that'll be a lot of fun. But stay safe out there, everyone. Enjoy your weekend, and I'll talk to you guys again on Monday.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.